2026 marks the 250th birthday of the United States of America. But is the United States in decline? Is the USA's time up? We'll look at the United States of America and what is going on this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread Podcast 133. And what we're going to do today is we're going to continue our discussion we did last time we did our prediction show, 2025, and then beyond into 2026. And we're going to look at the world is changing so fast in the year 2026 and the year 2027. There's going to be major changes, we believe, throughout the world. And what we're seeing is, I'm going to ask Pastor Brandon, by the way, I'm Pastor Keith, he's Pastor Brandon. Is America as an empire in decline? We are looking at Western civilization. Is it in decline? And we're going to ask the question, are we seeing two things come together that were never really meant to come together? And that's socialism and Islam seem to be joining forces. And so what's happening? Are these two entities going to merge and continue the decline of the United States of America? Or is this just simply a bump in the road? Like, are we going to come out of this okay? And so we had a lot of things happen right away. We had Mandani, who was sworn in as mayor of New York, who is a Democratic socialist in Seattle. They just elected a Democratic socialist. Minneapolis came very close to electing as mayor a Democratic socialist. So this seems to be increasing in the Democratic Party, at least the Democratic Socialist faction of that party seems to be gaining momentum and gaining power. So I'm just going to ask Pastor Brandon right off the bat, what do you think of this merger of between socialism and Islam joining together? What do you think of this?
Well, obviously, you have to think of it in terms of power and where power resides. And, socialists would say the power needs to reside with the people. And that's the idea of that. And it's really a gateway to communism. It's based on who is ultimately going to have ultimate control. But I think that where Islam comes in, or at least seems to come in, is that I think that those who are Islamic and desire an Islamic state within the United States would see socialism as a vehicle because of the relative weakness of the system. When you have a constitutional republic that we should be under constitutionally is what we are under, even though it's been eroded over the years. But when you have a constitutional republic, it stands in the way of those kind of changes. Whereas as you continue to erode the authority of the Constitution, it paves the road for authoritarianism. And I would argue that Islam is just a form of authoritarianism, that Islam being, the Quran being sort of the governing ideas of the nation, of the people. And so I think that it seems like to me, and I just want to preface all of this with, I'm no political commentator and I'm not an expert on, the political systems, but it would seem to me as a theologian and a pastor, that the idea is that socialism would be the vehicle by which Islam would come to power. Is what it seems like to me.
That's a really good observation. Again, yeah, you're right. We're just two pastors of a small church in Gainesville, Florida, who are watching all this happen and amazed because of how quickly these things are merging and coming together. And what we're seeing is this people talking about Islam, and if you're against Islam in any way, shape, or form, it's called Islamic phobia, which is prejudice against Islam and Muslims. And we have guys like Tucker Carlson who's on, like not a far right, but he's a right Republican guy talking that we need to stop this and allow, leave Islamic people alone because they're peaceful. But I think we need to really look at Islam, and there's a difference between Islam and Islamism. We can almost start with going back to the foundation of the United States of America. Was the United States of America built on Christian values? Was it built on Christian tradition? And if it is, why are we even allowing Islamic religion to take hold in our country? I know we're not politicians, like you said, so these are questions that we're just trying to look at biblically and trying to understand. So that's why I'm asking you these.
It's interesting because I think there seems to be, a group of people who have ulterior motives of destroying the United States. And, so I think there's a group of people who want to destroy the United States. And the best way to destroy the United States is to undermine the Constitution and, make us a pure democracy. And we could talk about the difference between the two, but I think that they want to undermine the United States, and they're, part of that is making us a secular nation, that we have shared values is what, they would say, but we're not a Christian nation. It's not actually biblically based. And so I think there are people who are trying to destroy the United States in that way. On the other side, there are, obviously people who would say, yes, we are a Christian nation. We were founded on Christian principles, and we need to hold on to that. Now, there's definitely a range of people within that group that we're talking about, that particular group, and, between how authoritarian you would get in terms of even a Christian king or prince that would lead the nation, so to speak, versus that we would get back to, a constitutional republic and have a Christian nation where the laws are based morally on God's word. And so that's kind of both sides there's two sides of that spectrum. I think that what's interesting is there's a middle, and I think the middle is where the true danger lies, because in the middle, you have a range of people from those who are secular, but they're not against Christian morality per se, but they are definitely intrigued by the other side. And so, if you think about the election, it hinges on this group of people and where their loyalties lie at any given time. And those things can change drastically from day to day to day, depending on how well they're doing or how well they think that the government is doing on their behalf. And so you have this big middle here where it really depends on where they're going, and it's kind of a wishy-washy middle. And what's interesting is that I think there's Christians, whether those who call themselves Christians, whether they know it or not, who are giving or aiding and abetting the other side. As Christians, we need to be all for Christian morality, all for ruling according to Christian values. But they are, John Piper, there's an ex post that's been kind of going around here recently where John Piper was talking about how proud he is that he was around, standing in line with a bunch of Somalis, and they were, this is a democracy kind of idea. And, this was several years ago that he said this. And of course, what they're saying is that this is what's led to what's happening in Minnesota today.
Yeah, and right now Minneapolis I think it's a powder keg. I think it's just.
And so I think hopefully unwittingly, you have people like John Piper who, they want Christian morality, but they understand the government, being secular is a good thing. But I think that those on the other side, on the far left, would take advantage of that, and I think that's the vehicle by which they can come to power. Now, how that intersects with Islam, again, I think Islam is trying to take advantage of the weakness of the socialism, the weakness of socialism, in order to ultimately institute authoritarianism, from an Islamic point of view.
Yeah, and right now Minneapolis is, I think it's a powder keg. I think it's just ripe for a riot to break out again there, just like it did in 2020. But, when you look at Mamdani, the mayor of New York, happens to be Islamic and also a democratic socialist. I'm not sure. I should have probably looked at that before we started, but the new mayor of Seattle, I don't think she is a socialist or a Muslim. But I know the guy who ran in Minneapolis was a Muslim. He was a Somali Muslim Democratic Socialist candidate and almost won mayor of Minneapolis. So I think what we're looking at is these three cities here, and it's funny how one is on the West Coast, one's in the middle, and one's on the East. It's almost like they're establishing these beachheads in the United States, but it seems to be the immigrant population of the cities are really into socialism, and I think a lot of them are Islamic. So I think they see this as the way to go, because it gives, like I think you nailed it on the head, that it gives them power, and socialism gives the one who is in power a lot of power. So yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think you got to remember too that socialism and then communism, which are they're cousins, close cousins. One is just not as radical as the other, but one is definitely a step toward the other. But I think we have to remember that much of that is based on class warfare, and that's where it kind of gets into like a Marxist idea. Whereas Marxism, I think, is there's I think that's more of a authoritarian, like being Marxist, and I think that historically has happened, but so yeah, I mean, we have to recognize that the class warfare part of this and what these Islamic people are doing, like Mamdani, and probably the one that you're mentioning in Minnesota, what's happening is that I think that Islam is kind of riding the coattails of socialism, and I think eventually what will happen if it actually goes through, eventually Islam will defeat socialism and it'll become basically authoritarian, with Islam being the authority.
Which is not the way our country was founded.
No, I mean, obviously we have safeguards constitutionally from that. And I just wanted to real quickly, I hear people talk about how the United States is a democracy, and I hear it from all sides that we're a democracy. Well, in reality, we're not a democracy. We're a republic. Mm-hmm. And the difference is that we have we are represented, and so the people in a true republic, which is what we were founded as, the people don't vote for different laws. They vote for people to actually go and vote for them. And the idea would be that they vote for what the people under them would want. So that you send a representative to Congress, and the representative is going to vote based on what his people want. But I mean, why that's different though is, well, I mean, there's something called the tyranny of the majority, and you can have and that's the reason why that's the reason why you hear people talk about the Electoral College. So, the Electoral College was set up by the Constitution, and it basically, the idea of the Electoral College is that we vote for electors who then go and vote for the president. And what that does is it makes sure, and that's the reason why, I think George Bush on a couple of occasions, at least on one occasion, lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College. And I think maybe Trump did in the first term as well, lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College. And that's because the Electoral College evens out the representation from big states and small states, because like California is so big in population that it would override, several, the population of several of the right-leaning states together. And so basically, if you had a pure popular vote, you would never have anybody that represents the the smaller states. And so I say all that to say, obviously in a republic, you also, in our constitutional republic, we also have the office of the president, we have the Supreme Court, and the judicial branch, the executive branch, and the legislative branch, and they all have checks and balances to make sure that neither gets too much power. But the problem is that we've kind of gone away from that, and socialism would take us even further away from that. And the problem with that is that now you take away the safeguards that would keep us from falling into an Islamic authoritarianism.
Yeah, and that's what we see kind of happening on the horizon here. And I was just going to bring this up. The reason we talk about this is because in the year 2026, it marks the 250th birthday of the United States of America. And this British historian named Sir John Glubb analyzed the life cycles of all the great empires over the last 3,000 years. And he found that there was a pattern to all of these empires: the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Roman Republic, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, that they all lasted for about 250 years. And then they all went through the same stages, which were, he calls it the age of pioneers, the age of conquests, the age of commerce, the age of affluence, the age of intellect, and then the age of decadence and decline. And obviously the United States is in this final stage as well. And so we see the world is changing, it's moving, and I think you've said this a couple times, there's never a vacuum. Like if there's something that's being sucked out, something else will jump in and replace it. And so we're seeing this democratic socialist America, this platform gaining momentum, and we're also seeing Islam, because we have a lot of immigrants that have come in that are Islam, and they are setting up, I think it's normal for them to set up their own Sharia law, because that's part of what Islam does. So we're seeing that happen rapidly in what was once a Christian nation. But I'm wondering if we can ever, is it too late now to change that? Like, are we just sort of stuck? Can we stop it, or what do we do?
I mean, yes, I think it could be stopped, but it's going to depend on that, that group of people in the middle and how much stomach they have for stopping it. And, you're going to have guys on the left that are always going to say, well, how dare you do this or that, like immigration policy and kicking people out of the country who shouldn't be here, who aren't here legally. They're going to push on that, and you're always going to have theologians who are going to, give them a free pass in that way and say, yeah, I mean, you have to honor the immigrant among you, and that's what the Bible says. But in reality, when we've talked about it prior to this with immigration, that biblical immigration is different than what they're saying it is, and there's nothing wrong with a nation enforcing its boundaries, and that it has a certain requirement for who can be a citizen and who isn't a citizen. And it has a requirement for who can be here and who can't, and that's legitimate biblically. That's the expectation biblically, and so that I think that is I think that's the vehicle by which we end up at authoritarianism potentially, and that going back to that group in the middle, they're the ones who are going to decide, like who actually is going to be in power. And I'm looking forward, to the 2026 election with. I'm very nervous about it because Trump has done a lot of things that I think are ultimately good, but it's hard to stomach, especially for someone who isn't grounded in understanding biblically, some of the things that are happening. And I'm certainly not saying that Trump is perfect and that he always has the right motives, because I don't know his motives, but I will say that many of the things that he's done actually make sense biblically. And so, but I think that secular middle and the religious middle, the problem is that, are they going to have the stomach to continue this, or is there going to be a backlash in 2026, which even could potentially, I think Trump came out and said, look, if Republicans lose control of the House and the Senate, he will be impeached in the last part of his term. And so, will he be removed from office? I mean, that's a tall hill to climb. but I think they would definitely have impeachment proceedings, and he would be basically fighting for his political life, if that happens. And so, yeah, I think that what we do going forward is going to be dependent upon how that works and how much the American voters allow Trump to do what is right, to do the things that he's doing.
If you look at what President Trump's doing, is he a genius or is he just stumbled onto this, what he's doing? Because what he's doing is genius, I think, because what we're seeing in the world today is there's the new power that's rising in the world, and it's what the Bible actually predicted, is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. These four are becoming the major power. The United States is declining, and Trump is actually slowing this down, and he's almost changing it, because I think if you look at what Donald Trump's doing, he's given up on Europe. I think Europe is gone. I think it's no longer what it was 40 years ago. It's very Islamic now, and
they're at least 20 years ahead of us in terms of this secular worldview, and maybe even 30 years ahead of us. We're gaining ground on them rapidly, and yes, I think that what we're seeing in Europe is what they want to see happen in the United States, and so it does make sense that Trump has given up on Europe as a player.
Yeah, and if you look at what he's doing, look at his Middle East, all the stuff he's doing in the Middle East. He's got this peace plan with Israel that they're trying to implement. It's real that peace plan that he's made with Israel has really weakened Iran. And what we see going on in Iran now with all these protests and marches, Trump has stopped sending them these incredible pallets of money that Obama was sending them, and so they're in big trouble now. They're actually falling. We also have Venezuela. He went in and took out the president of Venezuela, and now he's taken over the oil. And if you look at it now, the United States is now the main player in the world on oil almost, because China was getting, I think, 70 or 60% of their oil from Venezuela. So he weakened China. He's weakened North Korea. They were getting a lot of their oil from Venezuela. So it's interesting what he's doing. It's almost like he's trying to save the dollar, because it looks like, like we talk about the gold standard. The United States is on the petrol dollar, and that's important. And what he's done is he's, just by doing what he did in Venezuela, has bolstered the U.S. dollar. All these things that he's doing, it's remarkable. He is weakening China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and strengthening the United States. He's bringing everything back to where it was. If you go back 4 years ago when Biden was president, I mean, things were like really going to go bad. The world was moving in this direction, but Trump has almost completely stopped that. And like I said, is he a genius, or does he just stumble into this plan?
Wile E. Coyote, super genius. I don't know of that answer. I mean, he does seem to be a guy that's playing a different game than everybody else, and seems to be able to see ramifications further down the road than most people can. And so it seems like that, that's part of his, if you want to call it genius. I mean, what he's done in Venezuela, I mean, there's people who, obviously on the left, there's people are bemoaning that. And yet, I mean, basically he's forced them, because they're against him so much, that he's forced them to basically be on the side of a dictator. And, that in Venezuela, he's hated. And so what he did there is definitely a genius move when it comes to strategically, especially as you mentioned with the BRICS nations, and weakening their assault on the dollar. And at the end of the day, I mean, I know, again, this is not stuff that is Sunday school stuff. I mean, it's not. And, he's not a Sunday school teacher. He's not a pastor. I mean, he's here to do what he has to do to make America great, to strengthen America. And, I think that we have to understand that it's different than, what we, in terms of, how we would handle ourselves and, within the household of God and our own families, that the government's different. And so it has a responsibility to God and to its to the people to protect them. And so it sometimes takes things that are not easily, it's not easy to stomach. And, and I go back to the middle and say, it really comes down to how the middle reacts, especially in the 2026 election.
Absolutely. It's interesting that when we talk about, does he know what he's doing? I don't know. Obviously God has a plan. God is sovereign. God's using him to slow down this process that was going on as we see it. But I think what we're seeing is, and I think Trump he did this 2016 to 2020, is that, again, he slowed down this world, one world system that's coming. I think it's coming. I don't think you can stop it, but I think you can slow it down and push it back maybe a little bit, but I do think it's going to come. And maybe he's the only guy that could have done this. I want to look at it a little bit more biblically as we see what's going to happen and what's coming. As I want to look at more of the Democratic Socialist American Party platform, what they believe. I have their top 7 things written down here, that the Minnesota Democratic Socialist of America, what they believe, and I don't know if it's probably very similar to what they believe nationally, but I just want to go through these 7 things with you and then have you kind of just comment on them biblically, looking at them biblically, how they match up with the way God has designed things for us to look. Maybe we should even start with how God has designed society. I know you've kind of taught on this before, where God has laid out the way man should live. And I just want you to kind of go through those quick before I go through these Democratic Socialist America stuff, just so we know how much this is against all of that.
That's a tough question in the sense that, I think that if we were doing things according to the way, what he would say is the perfect way, he's going to send Christ to rule in perfection, and Christ is going to rule, and he's going to be basically a benevolent dictator. I mean, that's what it boils down to. Who's going to rule according to justice, God's justice, and according to God's love. That is the perfect government. The problem is man is not perfect. The problem is that no one man can stand in that place and do it to the level that God can, Christ himself. And so you have to, in terms of a government, there has to be some level of checks and balances. And I mean, I think that's what the framers of the Constitution came to as they looked back on history, and they looked back on the history of dictators and kings and those people who are in authoritarian positions and how they've responded in those positions. That's what led them to institute a democratic republic, that constitutional republic that has checks and balances, so that no one person or group of people have final say. And so, I mean, I think that it's the best system of government, although not perfect. It's the best system of government that we've seen in practice. So, in terms of the history of the world, at least I would argue that. And so, but it's still not perfect. It's still not what God is going to ultimately institute in Christ returning. And of course, I'm referring to the 1,000-year reign of Christ, that he's going to come and set up his government, and he's going to set up his throne, and he's going to rule from Jerusalem, and he's going to rule over a true renaissance of that way. And so short of that, the Democrat or the constitutional republic has been the best human government that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then when we look at what happened after the flood, when Noah came out of the ark, God implemented law and order, really is what he did, the capital punishment. And so I think one time you taught on that God has given us law and order, he's given us government to implement that, and then also the family, where there's a mother and a father that raise children in a disciplined way, and then also there's the church. Like, all these things are sort of there until Christ comes and reigns, maintain order. And those are important pillars of society. And what we're seeing is those pillars are being eroded away. They're being chipped away. They want to bulldoze those down and rebuild it in a different way.
Yes, I mean the church is being neutered, the family is being neutered. That's why the socialist would be for a social programs, especially for unmarried mothers and taking care of them, because they want the state, they want people dependent upon the state, and that's not a biblical way of looking at things, but it is what they're doing. And the question is, what's the goal? What's the end goal?
Yeah, Mandani was sworn in, like you said in the last podcast, on a Quran, and he talked about replacing the coldness of rugged individualism, which is what America was kind of founded on, and replacing it with the warmth of collectivism, which is a very terrifying word, really. So what is collectivism? What do you think that he meant by that?
Well, I think he's talking about the people ruling. And, I think he's talking about basically a pure democracy where, you have the majority that rules. And, and I think he's also talking about removal of the classes, at least except for the ruling class. I mean, there's always going to be a ruling class, and they don't tell you that. They would say that, even the ruling class would go away and kind of melt into the people, and everybody's on the level playing ground. But the problem is, because of man's sin, that never works, and it can't work. I mean, there's a myriad of reasons why, not the least of which, not everybody, having everybody at the same level, forcing them to be at the same level. I mean, it doesn't work, because it's going to move to the lowest common denominator. So if a guy is lazy and won't do anything, if everybody's equal, why would I work harder, right? Why would I actually try and get ahead? Because I can't. And I think it basically causes us to go to the lowest common denominator, which is everybody just becomes lazy and disengaged, and because there's no reason to do anything more than that.
What I take from that is everyone's going to have the same things, so there'll be no need. Everyone's going to have what everyone else has, so you don't have to steal anything. You're not going to have to go without. You're going to have what everybody has. And so, but in order to have that, you have to even everything out, which to me, this sounds more Marxist than socialist. But
well, I think that Marxism would mean that, yes, I mean, but I think it's based on who's an authority. In Marxism, you would have a central authority that forces these things to happen, and socialism would be more of a democratic, where the people still theoretically have the power. But the problem is that socialism can easily give way to Marxism, and so, and again, I'm not an expert on political systems, but it does stand to reason that socialism would be a stepping stone toward more authoritarian systems.
I think they're replacing God's creation order, like we just talked about. The way God has laid it out for man, there should be law and order. There should be a government implementing that. And there should be a nuclear family where, they're raising children. We always say it's not the state's job. It's not public school's job to raise your kids. It's parents' job. And all that's being eroded. They're taking all that away. We're talking about the collectively raising children to all, not have a mom and dad, but just collectively being raised. But my question to you is, and obviously the answer for us believers is very obvious, but I just want to, let's just maybe talk through it, is that why is this important to protect God's creational order? Or should we just say, you know what, let's try living like this. Maybe this would be okay. Like once we go down that road.
The problem is that the assumption with those systems is that man is basically good, that given the right set of circumstances, he'll do the right thing. Whereas a constitutional republic recognizes that man will left to his own devices, will do the wrong thing, will commit sin. And so it's really a worldview, even to the heart of man. How do we see man? And the biblical worldview would say that man is made in the image of God, but he's fallen. And because he's fallen, there's going to be, unless that person is redeemed, they're going to do the wrong thing. I mean, they're going to do what is best for them. They're going to seek power. I mean, Paul lays all that out in Romans 3, that, that they're swift to shed blood, all those things. Their, tongue is an open grave. I mean, all those things that he says in Romans 3 about man. The problem is that, that's what, in terms of a constitutional republic, that's what we recognize. That we recognize biblically, that man is not good, that he is fundamentally sinful. Whereas the socialist the socialism would basically say man will do what is right, and that generally will do what is right if he's given the right set of circumstances. So the idea is to change the circumstances by forcing the rich to help the poor, so to speak, kind of the Robin Hood mentality, that that sort of thing. And so yeah, I mean, it the problem is that it opens the way to, as I keep saying, it opens the way to authoritarianism, because as it continues, as it goes, it will fail. But as it fails, what happens is that people will argue that we haven't taken it far enough. That's the reason why it's failing, is because we haven't taken it to its ultimate goal. And that's where you get into authoritarianism, where you say, okay, this group of people or this person is going to be now in charge of what's going on. That it's going to be, everything's going to be centralized, and there's going to be centralized control. And if people don't fall in line, then they suffer the consequences.
Yeah, and that's why the United States, I think you said it the best right there, is that it was based on God's creation order. It was based on the Bible. And so we had this country that was born that just completely became just blessed and became the most richest, most powerful nation in the world, but then said, look, let's just kind of push those things to the side and let's go a different direction. And then we're seeing the decline of that. So yeah, it's interesting how the way God is designed, if we live the way God designs it to live, we live a better, it's not a perfect life, because like you said, man is sinful. We need places to punish people. We need jails. We need prisons to send people who refuse to live that way. And that's just the way God has designed it. And so I just want to go through really quick these Democratic Socialist America platform, and just to be honest with you, when I read these, I don't want to live in this world, in this kind of country, because I just don't think it's going to work, because like you said, we're all sinners and this is not going to work. So let me just read these to you, starting with the first one, and you can just comment on some of these and tell me what you think of them. Number one is goal is to free all incarcerated people. I don't know really what that means. If that means no matter what you've done, if you murder someone, you're going to be freed. But that's terrifying to me.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to live in a society that doesn't have any there's no punitive response to evil. The sword, the government should bear the sword. And I would argue that we need to be even more punitive than we are. That we need to. Obviously, there needs to be. We need to have the death penalty. We need to have that written in the law, that there is the death penalty, and it serves as a deterrent for those who would commit crime if there was nothing punitive. If you don't. So even today, I feel like the law is not strong enough to make sure that we don't have crime. I think that we need to have a stronger police and judicial system that way. So to go completely the other way, again, it's assuming man is generally good if he has the right circumstances. So basically, if he was born, and instead of being born poor, as an example, and maybe or in an oppressed class, he wouldn't have ever acted out. And that's just not true of the human heart. So I think it's destined to fail if they try to do that. I mean, it has failed every time that's been done.
Yeah, I totally agree. And their second one is to close all local jails. That's another one that makes no sense.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. The third one,
I don't know what else to say. I mean, that I've already said, but you just can't. A society will not be able to function if certain elements of society is not held in check.
Do you think, I'm just asking this question, do you think that people would commit less crimes knowing that there is no punishment?
No, they would commit more crime.
That's what I'm thinking, but are they thinking that maybe because there's no fun in it anymore, like they wouldn't be pursued?
But what they're saying, what they think is that because they were given just as much as the next guy, right, or the next person, so you even that playing field, that they no longer have a reason for committing crime. The problem is that the human heart doesn't work that way. We are always going to be trying to because of our sinful nature, we're always going to be trying to make things better for ourselves. And so there are going to be an element of people that in society that will go out of their way to better themselves, and they'll do it illegally if there's no ramification or very little ramification. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in places where the judicial system is not strong, where there isn't a strong police presence. We're seeing people do more and more. I mean, in California at this point, I think I forget what the number is, maybe 300 is coming to my mind, but it may be more than that actually. But if they shoplift, so if they go in and shoplift a pack of cigarettes, let's just as an example, they can't be prosecuted because they can't be prosecuted because of it's not a certain level. Like it has to be over a certain amount.
Yeah.
And at least I think it's that way still. So, but that just encourages people to shoplift, right? People are walking into stores and just picking up what they want, and businesses are actually having to close because of that. I mean, it's interesting. It's been a while back, but I'm sure it's still the same. I don't go to Walmart anymore, hardly at all. But you go to Walmart, you walk into the electronics department, and everything's locked down. And why is it locked down? Because people steal, and the laws are not strong enough to deter that.
Yeah, if everything was free, let's say you walked into Walmart, everything was free, would people just take what they need, or would they just stock up and just take everything?
They would take everything they could.
I'm looking at the Democratic Socialist America platform.
But again, we're looking at it from a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
Biblical worldview says man is he's sinful. The heart is wicked above all else, and so that's a biblical worldview. And if there's no restraint, then man will go to. I mean, it's like just like before the flood, before the death penalty was instituted, before the flood, it was vigilante justice, and so the strongest actually ended up overcoming the weak, and that's exactly what will happen in a situation where there's no restraint.
Absolutely, because I'm what I'm saying is I'm looking at this Democratic Social America platform, and the first 6 have to do with prisons and police and lawyers and all this stuff. So to me, this is almost satanic, where Satan wants the worst of the worst just out running around, causing chaos, which is, I just think if this is implemented, this would cause so much chaos in our world. I mean, I look at New York City right now. It's going to be interesting to look at New York a year from now and see just what happens if this stuff is all implemented. Because their third one is disarm and defund the police. We've seen that already in 2020 with what happened in Minneapolis. They all cities talked about, we need to defund the police. We need to hire less people, which is crazy because it's the opposite of that. So anyway, and then the fourth one is to abolish prisons. Again, you're opening the floodgates to all these rapists and murderers and, oh my gosh, child molesters. And I mean, can you imagine all these people out on the street? And it would just be awful. And then,
but they would put Trump in jail.
Yes, and also pastors. I think you and I would be.
Yeah, I think pastors would be in jail.
We'd be in jail for preaching God's words. It's exactly what Isaiah predicted, upside down world where good is evil and evil is good. And it's just nuts. And then just to round this off, they want to end all misdemeanors. So I guess shoplifting and all this stuff that's no longer, you could go in and do anything you want. But again, I think what you're saying, the future of stores might be just everything is glassed in, and then there's a kind of a robot that you push a button, this is what I need, and it'll go and get it for you. So you don't even go in the store anymore.
I mean, if you want to get down to what it'll end up, the direction it'll have to go is that it'll tell you what you need. You don't even tell them. You don't even tell them what you need. They tell you what you need, and obviously that's going from that's more authoritarian, but I think that's what the direction this goes, right? It goes that direction just because of the system is flawed.
That is crazy. And I'll just cut to the last one here. Their platform says social ownership of industry and infrastructure. So that means I guess the government would own everything, right? All the stores.
Well, they would say it's people controlled, like the people, like the workers are the ones that are controlling. So as an example, instead of things being controlled corporately, having a corporate structure with a board and with a CEO and CFO and all that, the employees themselves would be the ones who are driving the train. They're the ones who are setting the wages and setting the prices and that sort of thing. That would be more of that direction. Whereas full communism would be basically the government being the ones who runs they're the ones who run the businesses, the means of, you could say means of production. So does that make sense?
Yeah, but how do you think that would work if, let's say you and I are working at Walmart and we're in control of the store? So wouldn't we want to raise prices on things so we get more money rather than make things cheaper and get paid less? I don't know. That's just the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, there would no longer be a profit motive. The motive would be for basically any profits, so to speak, would go to the people.
Yeah.
And it sounds good, except it's not, right? It sounds good, but it's not, because you're going away from the free market. Free market set allowing. By the way, we supposedly have a free market in the United States, but we really don't. It's again like the Constitution that's been eroded. But a free market basically sets prices, whereas if you have more of an authoritarian structure, those prices are set artificially, and it never works. It never works out in real. It sounds good, but it never works.
Yeah, that's true. This has been tried so many times, and I guess people always think, well, we're going to do it better this time, and it fails. And the next time, we'll do it better this time, and it fails. And it just keeps going over and over and over. Satan just recycles everything and makes it sound like, hey, this is going to work this time. And it does not. So anyway, we just started this off. Is America, I guess we call ourselves an empire, a republic. Are we in decline? The world is changing. It'll change in 2026. It'll change in 2027. I think a lot is going to change, and we'll just see where we end up. It's just not that we're trying to be, again, a Debbie Downer or anything, but we're just kind of looking at the way things are moving. Will we continue on this path to decline, or will we somehow make a turn? You just talked about the midterm elections coming up, and if you're right, if the Republicans don't do well, Trump may be out and we're going to start heading quickly down the cliff again, but we'll see what happens.
I think it all depends on how God, I don't, according to his own purposes. It's a matter of his sovereign will. I can see it. I could see us having a reprieve for, several decades even. Where God continues to give us chances to get this, to do what's right. And I could also see 2026 going a bad direction and Trump being impeached after, the basic control of Congress goes to the Democrats and they impeach Trump. And I can almost guarantee that if the Democrats ever get back in power, that they're going to try to jail him again. And, unfortunately, I think they will succeed if they try it again. That's, by conjecture. I don't obviously I don't have a time machine to go ahead and see what would happen, but I can definitely see if this thing goes bad in 2026, that would be a step toward a huge, huge backlash on what President Trump has done in the first year and a half of office.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. And
I guess it's been a year.
Yeah. I know. It seems like he's been there longer.
There's been a lot that's happened in a year.
Yes. Yeah, last year was a big year, and I think this year is going to be, things are going to happen just as quickly and just as big. But again, I think what we're looking at is the decline of America. Trump has kind of put the brakes on a little bit, but I think it's just inevitable. But whatever happens, we don't want to be, like I said, depress people or bring people down, because God will take care of his own people. So if we are faithful, he's going to take care of us no matter what happens. And our little church here in Gainesville, Florida, he's going to continue to bless if we stay faithful. And so we'll just see what happens, right? It's one of those things where you just kind of live it out.
Yeah, we can't put our hope in things below. That doesn't mean that we should withdraw completely from things going on, even politically, but we shouldn't put our hopes in a political system or in a person like Trump. We may agree with a lot that he does, but he's still a flawed person, and we need to put our faith in Christ, the true King, and he will ultimately be the one who makes all things right. And whatever his will is in terms of what happens over the next 2 to 4 years, that's his will, whatever that is. And so we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot happening because, we didn't even talk about AI and how that's going to affect things. And other changes are going to come as a result of that. And we live in a complicated world, and it's hard as Christians. I recognize this because it's hard. I have a hard time being able to understand the nuance of everything, and there's so much coming at us that it's hard to understand. And I don't have a corner on an understanding. I just am trying to do just like everybody else, and watch it. But I'm also working hard to put it through a biblical lens and why, as terms of what we do and how we look at the world. And so that's why we do Fresh Bread, is because we want to. We want to look at the culture. We want to look at, different things through a biblical lens, and that's what we're trying to do here. Absolutely,
yeah. That's what we're trying to let everybody know that we're staying in touch with what's going on, but we're not letting that affect us to the point of, we're just going to give up. No, we're trusting the Lord, but we're also looking at trends and the way things are moving, and nothing really surprises us at all, because we understand that this was all predicted.
There's things that surprise me, but not ultimately. When you look at man's heart and what man is going to do and that sort of thing, I'm never surprised that way. But I'm always surprised at specific things, like, stuff that happens. Like, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. But yeah.
Yeah, as quickly. And yeah, I think I surprise you every day, don't I? Surprise you every day.
Yeah, I think so. Well, not every day, because I don't think we talk every day.
No, we don't. We text we text more during the week, but yeah, when we're together and play golf or whatever we're doing, I think, I shock you and I don't surprise you sometimes, but. You've been listening to Fresh Bread, podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.